You are not stuck because you lack ability. You are stuck because your days leave no space for change. You wake up, react, repeat, and then wonder why life does not look different. But with just one thing, 1 hour each day that is absolutely protected, the trajectory of your life can shift in a new direction. This video is not for those who only want something that sounds good. It is for those who are tired of repeating themselves, those who know that inside them there is a stronger version waiting to be awakened. If you feel that you were born to live more than this, stay, because the next hour could be the beginning of the moment when your old self can no longer keep up. There is a very quiet moment when you suddenly realize that your life is moving along the same pattern. You wake up with familiar thoughts, familiar reactions, familiar emotions, and you end the day with the same unnameable exhaustion. Not because you lack ability, not because you are unintelligent, but because you have lived too long in automatic mode, day after day. You react instead of choosing. You let the rhythm of life carry you instead of leading it. And then, one day, you feel that you are standing in the exact same place, even though time has moved very far. The moment of awakening is not loud. It does not arrive through a major event or a violent shock. It comes softly, like a question echoing inside you. Why am I still here? Why do I feel there is more, yet I cannot reach it? Why does this life feel like the same single year, repeating itself again and again? When that question appears, you begin to recognize an important truth. The problem is not life itself. The problem is the way you are living each day. You do not lack motivation. You lack space. Space to think differently. Space to feel yourself again. Space to become a new person instead of continuing to maintain the old version. When each day is filled with noise, obligations, expectations, and distractions, there is no room for change to enter. You cannot build a new life inside an old schedule, and you cannot rise beyond yourself when every moment is already occupied. There is something you need to understand right now. Change does not require an entire lifetime. It requires a gap. A gap quiet enough for you to stop, calm enough for you to hear your inner voice, clear enough for you to see the direction you have forgotten. 1 hour each day is not time. It is a boundary. The boundary between a person who lives by reaction and a person who lives with intention. When you do not have that space, you are pulled by everything. Messages, notifications, pressure, other people's opinions, urgent tasks that are not truly important. Your energy becomes scattered. Your focus is worn down, and your identity is shaped by the environment rather than by choice. You do not notice this immediately, but deep inside, you always feel that you are not truly living up to your potential. The moment of awakening is when you stop blaming circumstances and begin to look directly at the structure of your daily life. It is when you understand that, without a protected space, no sustainable change can happen. 1 hour each day is not a luxury. It is the minimum condition for you to stop repeating and begin to rise. And from this moment on, the real journey of change begins. When you begin to set aside 1 hour for yourself, the first thing that changes is not your outer life but the way you show up internally. This hour does not exist for doing more tasks. It exists so you can stop drifting on momentum. Most of the time, you live like a pre-programmed reflex. You wake up and do what needs to be done. You react to what appears. You handle the day as a series of tasks to complete rather than a journey to be guided. And in that state, you are not truly living. You are operating. 1 hour each day is the moment you step out of that unconscious flow. It is when you are no longer pulled by other people's schedules, other people's expectations, or the distractions of the world. In this hour, you do not rush, you do not react, you do not chase. You stop, and that very stopping creates choice. When you stop, you begin to see clearly where you are going and why you are there. Living in automatic mode makes you believe everything is obvious. You believe you have no time. You believe you are too busy. You believe you will change when conditions become more favorable. But the truth is, there are no perfect conditions. If you do not actively create space for change, change will never arrive. 1 hour each day is how you tell yourself that this life is meant to be guided, not endured. When you enter that hour with intention, you begin to train something extremely important, the ability to choose instead of react. You no longer do everything out of habit. You begin to ask why you are doing this. You no longer let emotions pull you along. You begin to observe emotions and decide how to act. This is a profoundly deep shift. Because from the moment you stop living by reflex, you begin to build a new identity. 1 hour each day is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming aware. Aware of how you think, aware of how you use your energy, aware of what truly matters to you. When you gain this awareness, many things naturally fall away. Unnecessary concerns, goals that no longer fit, expectations that were never yours. And at the same time, a new direction begins to emerge. In automatic mode, you usually live to react to life. In 1 intentional hour, you live to direct life. This difference changes everything. When you react, you are always behind. When you direct, you move ahead. 1 hour each day gives you that advantage. The advantage of clarity, the advantage of knowing what you are building. At first, this hour may feel strange. You may feel restless. You may feel uncomfortable, because your mind has grown used to constant stimulation. When the stimulation disappears, you are forced to face yourself. And that is not easy. But it is precisely in that discomfort that you begin to separate from the old version of yourself. The version that always needs noise to avoid thinking. The version that stays busy to avoid feeling. 1 hour each day teaches you a rare skill. The skill of staying with yourself. Without avoidance, without escape, without numbing emotions through distraction. When you learn to stay, you learn to lead. You begin to see that you do not need more. You need clearer, not to do more, to do what is right. The moment you protect 1 hour for yourself, you send a powerful message to your identity. That message says, this life is no longer something that happens to you, it is something you are actively creating. And from here, every decision throughout the day begins to change. You say no more easily, you focus better, you clearly distinguish what is worthy of your energy. 1 hour each day is a doorway. Behind that doorway is not immediately a different life, but a different person slowly taking shape. A person who no longer lives by momentum. A person who knows how to stop, think, choose, and move forward. When you step through this doorway each day, you are no longer the same person. Even if you do not see it immediately, your direction has changed. And that new direction will lead you to places your old version never reached. The moment you manage to protect 1 hour for yourself, something unavoidable begins to happen. Tension starts to appear inside you. Not from the outside, but from within. It is the silent confrontation between 2 versions that coexist inside you. One version is accustomed to safety, familiar with the old rhythm, comfortable with not having to change. The other version has just awakened, has just touched the possibility of living with intention, and is longing to move to a higher level of itself. The old self is not bad. It was simply built to survive. It learned how to avoid risk, cling to what is familiar, and repeat what once helped you stay alive. The old self prefers predictability. It wants you to remain where everything is known. It whispers that you should wait a little longer, start later, rest today, and make it up tomorrow. It does not hate growth. It is afraid of losing control. Meanwhile, the new self is not loud. It does not shout. It does not force. It appears as a very clear feeling, the feeling that life holds more than this, the feeling that you were not born merely to react and endure, the feeling that if you do not step forward, you are betraying yourself. The new self does not seek comfort. It seeks truth, and truth often requires leaving the familiar zone. This confrontation does not happen once, it happens every day. Each time you are about to step into your hour for yourself, the old self appears. It does not come with fierce opposition, it comes with very reasonable arguments. You are tired today. You are busy today. 1 hour will not change anything. You have already tried. These reasons sound familiar because they once protected you from pressure in the past. But for that same reason, if you follow them, you will remain exactly where you are. What you need to understand is that this resistance does not mean you are weak. It is a sign that you are touching the boundary of your old identity. Every identity protects itself. When you begin to live differently, the old identity senses a threat, and its natural reaction is to pull you back, not to harm you, but to preserve what feels familiar. If you do not recognize this, you will think you lack discipline. You will blame yourself. You will wonder why you cannot maintain consistency. But when you look deeper, you will see that this is not a matter of willpower. It is a matter of identity. You cannot ask the old self to lead you into a life it has never known. 1 hour each day becomes the battlefield of this confrontation. Not a loud battlefield, but a very quiet one. A place where you must decide which voice you will follow, the voice that wants to stay or the voice that wants to move forward. And what decides is not emotion, it is action. You do not need to feel ready, you only need to show up. Each time you show up in that hour, you are telling the old self that it no longer gets to lead. At first, the new self is very weak. It has no proof, it has no history. It has only intuition and a faint direction. Meanwhile, the old self has years of experience, habits, and reflexes. So if you wait until the new self is strong enough before acting, you will wait forever. The new self only grows strong through repeated action. This confrontation does not require you to destroy the old self. It requires you to stop letting it hold the wheel. The old self can continue to exist, but it no longer decides the direction. Each time you fully protect 1 hour for yourself, you are transferring power. Very slowly, very quietly, but very real. There will be days when you feel like you are moving backward, days when doubt appears, days when no clear progress is visible. Those are the days when the old self is strongest. It will tell you that everything is meaningless. But precisely on those days, if you still show up, you are creating the one thing the old self cannot fight: evidence. Identity does not change through thought. It changes through repeated behavior. When you repeat the behavior of the person you want to become, even for just 1 hour each day, your brain begins to register a new truth. You are no longer someone trying to change. You are someone who knows how to show up for yourself. And this shift is deep. This silent confrontation will not disappear quickly, but each day it will become less intense. The old self weakens when it is no longer fed by action. The new self becomes clearer when it is confirmed through consistency. And at some point, you will realize something important. You no longer have to struggle as much as before. Choice becomes more natural. Then you understand that you have crossed a major threshold. You are no longer just talking about living with intention. You are living that way. And the old self, though still somewhere within, no longer has the strength to hold you back. The confrontation did not end with a dramatic victory. It ended with quiet steadiness. And that quiet steadiness opens the path for the next step in your journey of rising. When the inner confrontation begins to settle, you recognize a truth more clearly than ever before. It is not that you lack the ability to focus. Your mind has been fragmented for far too long. Each day, your attention is pulled in so many directions that you are no longer fully present in any single moment. You are here, but your thoughts are elsewhere. You are working, but your mind constantly drifts away. You are living, but rarely truly present. And when a person lives in a fragmented state, they cannot lead themselves. Reclaiming mastery of the mind does not begin with doing more. It begins with removing the things that constantly tear your attention apart. removing the noise that prevents you from hearing your own thoughts, removing the habits that train the mind to expect interruption rather than depth. In this world, everything competes for your attention, but not everything that captures your attention deserves it. You do not realize the extent of the fragmentation until you step into a quiet hour, when familiar sounds are gone, when screens no longer constantly shift images, when habitual stimulation disappears. At that moment, your mind begins to resist. It runs. It jumps. It looks for something to cling to. It reminds you of unfinished tasks. It pulls you back into old thought patterns. This is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you have lived in noise for too long. A strong mind is not a mind that is always active. It is a mind that knows how to stay, how to hold attention in one place long enough for something to take shape. When you cannot sit with your own thoughts for a few minutes, you are being controlled more than you realize. You react instead of choose. You are led instead of leading. And this is why reclaiming mastery of the mind is a necessary shift if you want to rise beyond yourself. One uninterrupted hour each day becomes a space of reconstruction, a space where the mind relearns how to be whole, not through force, but through consistency. You do not try to make thoughts disappear. You simply stop chasing them. You let them come and go. And each time you do not chase, you reclaim a bit of power. The loudest noise does not come from the outside. It comes from within, from repetitive inner dialogues, from unresolved worries, from old stories you keep telling yourself. When you do not create space, these voices quietly control you. But when you create a quiet hour, you begin to see them. And when you see them, they no longer dominate you the way they once did. Reclaiming the mind does not mean controlling every thought. It means choosing not to let every thought become a command. You learn to distinguish between thought and truth, between emotion and action, between impulse and choice. This is a foundational skill of a person who lives with intention, and this skill cannot be learned in chaos. It requires quiet. At first, the quiet may feel uncomfortable. You will realize how many things you have been avoiding. Unanswered questions, unprocessed emotions, desires you have pushed aside. Noise once helped you escape these things. When the noise disappears, you must face them. And it is precisely in this facing that strength is born. You cannot build a strong mind by constantly scattering it. You cannot create clarity when every moment is torn apart. When you protect one uninterrupted hour, you are teaching your mind something essential, that your attention has value, that not everything has the right to enter your inner space. Gradually, you begin to feel the change. Your thoughts slow down but deepen. Your reactions become less impulsive. Your emotions grow more stable. You are no longer pulled by every stimulus. You begin to filter. And when you filter, you begin to lead. A mind that is not fragmented is the foundation of all lasting transformation. When you can hold attention in one place, you can build anything, a new habit, a new skill, a new identity. But if your mind is constantly being pulled away, every effort leaks out. Now you begin to understand that the greatest enemy of growth is not failure. It is constant interruption. And the way you overcome it is not by trying harder. It is by removing what weakens you. One protected hour each day is the most powerful act you can give to your mind. When you reclaim mastery of your mind, you do not just focus better, you live differently. You are more present in every conversation, clearer in every decision, steadier under pressure, because you are no longer being pulled from within. This is a profound shift, because when the mind is no longer fragmented, you begin to experience something new, inner steadiness, not because life becomes easy, but because you are no longer torn in every direction at once. You are here, whole, and from that state, every next step in your journey of rising becomes possible. When fragmentation gradually fades, a new inner space begins to open within you. This space is not loud, not dramatic. It does not bring instant excitement. It is very quiet, and it is precisely this quiet that frightens many people. Because when there is no longer noise to cling to, you begin to face what you have been avoiding for a long time, yourself. For most of your life, you have been used to constant motion. There is always something to do, always something to respond to, always an external voice telling you what to think, what to feel, what to want. Stillness, therefore, becomes unfamiliar. When it appears, your mind does not know what to do with it, and the familiar reflex is to fill it with thoughts, with worries, with plans, with memories, with imagination. But if you allow yourself to stay a little longer, you will realize that stillness is not emptiness, it is a foundation. Stillness does not take anything away from you. It gives back. It gives back your ability to listen, not with your ears, but with presence. When external noise settles and the chaotic inner voice slows down, you begin to sense a very subtle inner guidance. This guidance does not command. It does not push. It simply shows you what truly matters and what is no longer necessary. In stillness, you begin to realize how far you have drifted from yourself. Not because you intended to, but because you became used to adapting, used to pleasing, used to responding, used to placing your own needs last. You learned to live by the rhythm of the world until you forgot your own rhythm. And when you forget that rhythm, you feel lost, even as life continues. 1 hour each day in stillness is not for thinking more. It is for feeling more clearly. Feeling when something no longer fits. Feeling when something is calling you forward. Feeling exhaustion that does not come from work, but from living in the wrong direction. Feeling emptiness that does not come from lack, but from losing connection with yourself. You may begin to notice desires you once abandoned, values you once held, but no longer live by, dreams that are no longer loud but are still there. Stillness does not create these things. It simply removes the layers covering them, and when the layers fall away, you begin to see clearly. Many people fear stillness because they fear facing the truth about past choices, the truth about compromises, the truth about the gap between who they are and who they know they could become. But it is within this truth that your real direction appears. Not a direction drawn by society, not a direction imposed by fear, but a direction that rises from within. When you hear that direction clearly, you no longer need excessive motivation. You do not need to force yourself forward, because clarity creates its own pull. When you know where you are going and why, staying with the journey becomes natural. You stop chasing too many things. You begin to filter. And this filtering brings a lightness you did not have before. Stillness also allows you to see the stories you have been telling yourself. Stories about limitation, about not being good enough, not having enough time, not having the right conditions. When there is no longer noise amplifying them, you begin to see that these stories are products of habitual thinking, not unchanging truths, and when you see that, their power weakens. You begin to realize that many past decisions did not come from true desire. They came from pressure, from fear of being left behind, from the need for validation. Stillness gives you the chance to look back without judgment, without blame, simply observing, and within this observation, you learn something essential. You can choose again, not to choose your entire life again, but to choose how you show up each day, how you use your energy, how you respond, how you prioritize. 1 quiet hour each day is where you recalibrate your inner compass. No need for dramatic change right away, just adjust the direction. And when the direction changes, every next step automatically leads you somewhere else. When you build your foundation on stillness, you create an inner anchor. An anchor that does not depend on circumstances, not on praise or criticism, not on external stability. It comes from knowing who you are and where you are going. And when you have that anchor, you are no longer easily shaken. This stillness also teaches you patience. Not patience with others, but patience with the process of becoming. You understand that not every answer arrives immediately. Not every path is clear from the beginning. But if you keep returning to this space of stillness, clarity will gradually emerge. Without force, without rushing, you do not need to tell anyone about this quiet hour. It does not need to be proven. It does not need to be displayed. Its power lies in privacy, in knowing that each day you have returned to yourself, and that return changes how you step back into the world. When stillness becomes the foundation, you no longer fear stopping. You no longer fear being alone with your thoughts. You no longer need noise to feel that you exist. You begin to live from the inside out. And from this point, your journey of rising enters a new phase. No longer an escape from the old self, but the steady guidance of the self that is taking shape. There is a moment each day that most people overlook, yet it carries more weight than almost any other decision. It is the moment you first wake up. Before the world has a chance to touch you, before noise begins to intrude, before you are pulled into roles, responsibilities, and expectations. That moment is where your identity for the day is set, and how you enter the morning determines whether you will lead the day or be dragged by it. If your morning begins in haste, reaction, and distraction, your entire day will carry the same rhythm. You will always be behind, always trying to catch up, always dealing with the consequences of what has already happened, instead of intentionally creating what you want. When you lose control of your morning, you have almost already handed control of the entire day to the outside world. Morning is not just the beginning of time. It is the beginning of identity. Who you wake up as is who you will live as for the rest of the day. If you wake up in chaos, you will behave like someone being pulled. If you wake up in stillness and intention, you will behave like someone who leads. This difference is not small. It compounds daily and gradually shapes who you become. Many people begin their mornings by handing their minds to others. They check messages. They look at notifications. They read opinions. They allow external information to shape their internal state before they even realize how they feel. In that moment, you are no longer living from the inside out. You are living from the outside in. And you cannot build a strong identity that way. The first hour of the day is when your mind is most receptive. It has not yet been worn down by pressure, not yet scattered by demands, not yet stretched by responsibility. This is when you can plant the seeds that will govern the entire day. How you use this hour is how you tell yourself what truly matters. When you choose to give the first hour to presence, you teach your mind a profound lesson, that you do not need to react immediately, that you have the right to choose how you step into a new day, that you are not required to follow the rhythm of the world. You can set your own rhythm, and when that rhythm is stable, everything else begins to adjust around it. An intentional morning does not need to be complicated. It does not require elaborate rituals. It only requires ownership. Ownership of your attention, ownership of your energy, ownership of your direction. When you begin the day by returning to yourself, you build a foundation that the rest of the day rests upon. Something very important happens when you protect the morning. You no longer allow your identity to be determined by urgency. You are no longer pulled into reaction from the start. You enter the day from the center instead of the edge. And when you live from the center, you make different decisions. You speak differently. You respond differently. Morning is where you choose who you will be today, not through words, but through action. When you begin the day in quiet, you choose to become a person of depth. When you begin the day with conscious movement, you choose to become a grounded person. When you begin the day with clarity, you choose to become a leader. If you skip the morning, you will spend the entire day trying to regain a state you never established. You will feel constantly pulled by events, always chasing tasks, always tired without knowing why. But when you reclaim the morning, everything changes. You do not need to try harder. You only need to begin correctly. The first hour is not where you do everything. It is where you set direction. When direction is right, you no longer need constant correction. Your energy does not leak. Your mind does not fragment. You carry that stability into every meeting, every task, every decision. Morning is also where a new identity is reinforced. The old self prefers haste, prefers checking, prefers reacting. The new self chooses to slow down, chooses presence, chooses leadership. Each morning you show up for yourself. You give the new self another piece of evidence. And that evidence accumulates quickly when repeated daily. You begin to notice that you are no longer easily pulled into trivial things. Situations that once stressed you no longer have the same grip, not because life has become lighter, but because you have become steadier, and that steadiness begins with how you enter each day. A quiet morning also teaches a different kind of confidence, not the confidence that comes from doing many things, but the confidence that comes from not being pulled. You know that whatever the day brings, you began from a stable place, and that place is always within you. When you win the morning, you do not need to fight the entire day. You do not need to constantly swim against the current. You have already set your own current, and that current carries you in the direction you chose. Morning is not a small part of life. It is the doorway into how you live. When you step through that doorway with intention, you are not just starting a new day. You are reinforcing the identity of the person you are becoming. And from here, the journey of cultivating deeper mental strength begins to open. When you have reclaimed your mornings and begun to live each day from your center, a greater challenge starts to reveal itself. The ability to hold attention on one point long enough for something real to be built. In a world where everything constantly grabs at your attention, deep focus becomes a rare capacity, and because it is rare, it becomes power. Most people do not lack intelligence. They lack the ability to stay with a thought, to stay with a task, to stay with a direction long enough for it to take root. They move from one thing to another, from one inspiration to the next, from one idea to another, and then they wonder why they always feel busy but never move far. The answer lies in the fact that their attention has never been gathered into a single force. Deep focus is not about working faster. It is about working more fully. When you are fully present with one task, energy does not leak. The mind is not pulled away. You do not have to constantly restart yourself. And in that state, something important happens. The mind begins to grow stronger, not because you force it, but because you give it the conditions to function properly. A mind that is constantly interrupted becomes accustomed to shallowness. It skims, it touches the surface. It does not stay long enough to go deep, but a mind trained in deep focus learns how to move into depth. It sees connections, it understands essence, and when you understand essence, you are no longer shaken by trivial details. Deep focus requires you to accept one thing: initial discomfort. When you try to stay with a task without reaching for familiar distractions, your mind reacts. It reminds you of other things to do. It creates restlessness. It convinces you that stopping to check or switching tasks is reasonable. But this is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are entering the training zone. That discomfort is like resistance when you begin exercising a muscle group you have never used. It does not say you are weak. It says you are training. If you quit the moment discomfort appears, you will remain in the familiar zone forever. But if you stay a little longer, something unexpected happens. The discomfort begins to fade. The mind slows down, and a different state starts to form. In deep focus, you no longer experience time the same way. You are not constantly checking the clock. You are not pulled out by small stimuli. You are inside the work you are doing, and this presence creates a completely different quality in your actions. Not only are the results better, your sense of self also changes. You begin to trust that you can stay with what matters. 1 hour each day dedicated to deep focus is not about doing everything. It is about doing one thing properly. one thing chosen with intention, one thing aligned with the direction you have defined. When you repeat this daily, your mind learns a very clear lesson, that it does not need to run, it can stay, and each successful stay adds a small accumulation of strength. The modern world rewards quick reaction, but personal evolution requires deep consistency. You cannot build a strong identity while constantly being pulled away from yourself. Deep focus is how you set boundaries around your attention. Not everything is allowed to enter. Not every call needs an immediate response. When you establish this boundary, you do not become distant, you become grounded. There is a profound difference between someone who does many things and someone who does deep work. The one who does many things often becomes exhausted. The one who works deeply becomes clear. The one who does many things is driven by pressure. The one who works deeply leads with intention. Over time, this difference turns into a vast gap in quality of life. Deep focus is also how you build respect for yourself. Each time you stay with a task instead of chasing distraction, you send a message to your identity that what you are building deserves full attention, that you do not need to fragment yourself to satisfy everything, that you have the right to choose depth over dispersion. At first, an hour of deep focus may feel long, but gradually you will begin to look forward to it, because it is the time when you do not have to perform, not react, not be pulled. It is the time when you work from the deepest part of yourself, and this feeling is very different from busyness. It carries a quiet satisfaction. When deep focus becomes a habit, you will notice many other changes as well. You listen better. You speak more slowly but more clearly. You make decisions with less hesitation, not because you know everything, but because you are accustomed to staying long enough to understand. And that understanding brings a different kind of confidence. Not loud, but solid. The power of deep focus is not in how much you accomplish in an hour, it is in who you become when you repeat that hour every day. You become someone who is not easily pulled away, someone who does not need to constantly change direction, someone capable of building something through to completion. And in a world full of distraction, such a person always goes farther than they expect. When you train deep focus, you lay another essential brick for your new identity, the identity of someone who knows how to stay, how to go deep, how to build, and from this foundation, you are ready to enter the next phase. The phase where discomfort is no longer an enemy, but a signal that you are moving closer to your true strength. As you move deeper into focused states, one unavoidable element appears: discomfort. It does not arrive as an obvious enemy. It comes subtly, a mild restlessness, an urge to leave, a thought that maybe you should do something else. This is the boundary where most people turn back, not because they do not want to move forward, but because they have never learned how to stay when comfort disappears. Discomfort is not a sign of wrong direction. It is a sign of growth. When you stay with a task long enough, the mind is forced to give up its habit of seeking instant stimulation. It is no longer indulged by constant movement, and so it resists. But this resistance is not meant to harm you. It is simply a signal that you are leaving the familiar zone. In the past, whenever discomfort appeared, you tended to escape. You switched tasks, you checked something else, you found a small distraction to soothe the feeling, and each time you did that, your mind learned a dangerous lesson. That whenever discomfort arises, leaving is the correct choice. Over time, you became very skilled at avoidance and very weak at building strength. Staying with discomfort is a skill, and like any skill, it must be trained, not through force, but through gentle yet steady commitment. You do not need to endure it rigidly. You simply need to not run away immediately. A few more minutes, one more breath, one more moment of presence, and within those moments, something begins to change. Discomfort has two sides. If you run from it, it will continue to control you. If you stay, it will dissolve, not instantly, but gradually. And as it weakens, another state emerges: stability. The mind stops jerking around. It begins to move into a steady rhythm. And within that rhythm, you feel a new kind of strength, not loud, not explosive, but enduring. Staying with discomfort teaches you something profound about yourself, that you do not need to feel good to act correctly, that you do not need to wait for inspiration to continue, that you can remain present even when emotions are unfavorable. This is the foundation of mental strength, not the ability to avoid difficulty, but the ability to not be controlled by it. Each time you stay instead of leaving, you retrain the relationship between you and your emotions. You no longer treat emotions as commands, you see them as signals, something to listen to, but not something you must obey immediately. When you create this distance, you reclaim choice, and choice is the core of inner freedom. Within an hour dedicated to yourself, there will be moments when you feel no progress, no new ideas, no positive emotions, no sense of achievement. This is when the old identity whispers that this is pointless. But if you understand correctly, this is the most important phase, because you are building the ability to stay even without immediate reward. And this ability is rarer than you think. Mental strength is not built on easy days. It is built in the moments when you could leave but choose to stay. No one sees those moments, no one praises them, but they create deep differences over time. You begin to trust that you can handle pressure, not through hardness, but through stability. Staying with discomfort also exposes old patterns, repetitive thoughts, familiar fears, stories you have told yourself for years. When there is no distraction to shield you, these things surface. And this is an opportunity, not to fight, but to observe. When you observe without reacting, the power of these patterns diminishes. They exist, but they no longer dominate. Many people confuse strength with intensity. They believe they must push harder, force more, overcome through willpower. But true mental strength comes from regulation, knowing when to continue, knowing when to adjust, knowing when to stay with discomfort without turning it into an enemy. 1 hour each day becomes your training ground for this strength, not a gym for muscles, but a gym for presence. Each time you stay with an uncomfortable sensation without trying to escape, you add 1 unit of inner endurance, and these units accumulate quickly when repeated. You will begin to notice that things which once discouraged you no longer have the same impact. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become steadier. You no longer need conditions to be perfect to continue. You no longer need to feel good to act. You begin to lead from within rather than being pulled by circumstances. Staying with discomfort also changes how you see failure. Failure is no longer a signal to stop. It becomes data, information for adjustment. When you are no longer afraid of the discomfort that comes with mistakes, you learn faster, you experiment more, and you move farther. A different kind of confidence is born here. Not confidence from always being right, but confidence from knowing that no matter what happens, you will stay with yourself. You do not abandon yourself when things become uncomfortable. And this trust is powerful. It does not depend on external outcomes. It comes from the relationship you build with yourself. When you learn to stay with discomfort, you cross an important threshold. You are no longer controlled by momentary urges. You no longer need to soothe every sensation immediately. You gain the ability to hold your direction even when the path is uneven. And from here, you are ready for the next step. The step where you not only tolerate discomfort, but begin to actively break the old patterns that have held you back for far too long. When you have developed the ability to stay with discomfort without running away, something else begins to appear with great clarity. Old psychological patterns. They are not single thoughts. They are loops, familiar paths that the mind automatically enters whenever there is pressure, insecurity, or doubt. For many years, these patterns have controlled how you react, how you decide, how you see yourself. And because they operate quietly, you rarely question them. Old patterns do not appear randomly. They are formed through experience, through moments of hurt, through times of failure, through moments when you learned to protect yourself. They once had a reason to exist. But what once helped you survive does not necessarily help you grow. When circumstances change but patterns do not, you begin to feel stuck. Not because life does not open up, but because you are still reacting as a person from the past. One of the most common patterns is avoidance. When something is difficult, you postpone. When emotions feel heavy, you distract yourself. When a choice requires courage, you find reasonable explanations to not act. This pattern does not cause immediate collapse. It simply keeps you in place. And staying in place long enough is also a form of falling behind. Another common pattern is self-doubt. Each time you move forward, a familiar voice appears. It reminds you of previous failures. It questions your ability. It makes you hesitate right at the edge of change. This voice sounds logical, but in truth, it is only memory repeating itself, not present truth. Breaking patterns does not begin with fighting them. It begins with seeing them. When you have enough stillness and enough inner capacity, you begin to notice the moment a pattern appears, not after everything has already happened, but right as it begins. You notice yourself about to delay, about to retreat, about to diminish yourself. And this moment of recognition creates a small opening. Within that opening, you have a choice. Not a perfect choice, just a different one. You do not need to do something big. You only need to not follow the old reflex. Instead of avoiding, you stay. Instead of postponing, you begin. Instead of self-doubt, you take a small, intentional action. These choices may seem small, but they carry great weight. Every pattern exists because it is fed by repetition. When you stop repeating it, it begins to weaken, not immediately disappearing, but gradually losing control. And each time you choose differently, you send a new signal to the mind that the old path is no longer the only path, that you can respond in a new way, that you are not trapped in a fixed script. Clear awareness is not about thinking more. It is about seeing more clearly, seeing the connection between thought, emotion, and action, seeing that a thought is only an event in the mind, not a command, not an absolute truth. When you have this distance, you are no longer swept away. You observe and choose, and this choice is the beginning of inner freedom. Breaking patterns also requires patience. Because old patterns do not disappear just because you see them once. They will return, sometimes strongly, sometimes subtly. But each time they return, you gain more experience in recognizing them. And each time you choose differently, you further weaken the old structure. One important thing to remember is that you do not need to win every time. You only need to win often enough to create a new direction, not perfection, but consistency. When direction changes, identity begins to follow. You are no longer someone who always avoids. You become someone who knows how to stay. You are no longer someone ruled by doubt. You become someone who acts even while uncertain. New choices may feel unfamiliar at first, because they do not fit the old image you had of yourself. But this unfamiliarity is a sign of evolution. You are stepping into new territory, a place where old reflexes no longer define you. When you break enough patterns, you begin to see an important truth. Life does not change because circumstances change. It changes because how you respond changes. And this difference accumulates quickly when you return to it each day during your hour for yourself. 1 hour each day is not only time for focus, it is a laboratory of identity. A place where you observe old reflexes, test new choices, and register the results. Without judgment, without drama, only honesty. Gradually, you will notice that things which once kept you stuck no longer carry the same weight, not because they disappeared, but because you no longer allow them to decide. You are reclaiming control over each small reaction. And when enough reactions are chosen anew, you are not just breaking patterns. you are rewriting how you live. This is a crucial transition, because from here, you are no longer only training endurance or focus. You begin to restructure the psychological foundation that once held you at the old level. And when the foundation changes, every layer above it changes as well. The road ahead is no longer repetition. It becomes expansion. When old patterns gradually reveal themselves and lose absolute control, a new space begins to form within you. This space is very subtle. It is not emptiness. It is the pause between thought and action. Before, this pause almost did not exist. A thought appeared and you reacted immediately. An emotion rose and you acted on it. Life unfolded as a chain of continuous reflexes. But now, a slowing appears, and it is this slowing that opens the door to freedom. Within this space, you are no longer forced to follow the first thing that appears in your mind. You realize that thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, but you are no longer a puppet pulled by every inner wave. You stand in a different position, the position of the observer, and from this position, you have choice. The space between thought and reaction is where a new identity is born, because identity does not live in thought. It lives in repeated choice. When you react according to old habits, you reinforce the old self. When you pause and choose differently, even slightly, you begin to nourish the new self. And this happens in very small moments, almost unnoticed by anyone. Yet their impact accumulates deeply. Before, when pressure appeared, you tensed up. When criticism came, you defended yourself. When failure happened, you withdrew. These reactions used to occur so quickly that you barely noticed them. Now, you begin to see them from a distance. You see emotions forming. You see thoughts preparing to lead. And in that moment, you can pause, not to suppress, but to choose direction. This pause does not need to be long, just enough for a single breath. Enough to ask whether you are choosing from fear or from intention. Enough to remember the direction you are building. And when you remember, your reaction changes. Not because you force it, but because you are no longer blind. The difference between a controlled person and a free one does not lie in whether they have negative thoughts. It lies in whether those thoughts control them. The space between thought and reaction is where you reclaim mastery. When this space becomes wide enough, you no longer live in automatic mode. You live in choice. 1 hour each day devoted to yourself is where you train this skill, not in dramatic situations, but in ordinary moments. When you notice you are about to delay, when you notice you are about to snap, when you notice you are about to diminish yourself, and you pause, just a little, but enough to choose differently. At first, this pause may feel fragile. Sometimes you realize too late. Sometimes you still react in the old way. But each time you notice, even afterward, you expand awareness a little more. And that awareness does not disappear. It accumulates. The space between thought and reaction is also where you learn compassion toward yourself. You no longer condemn yourself for imperfect reactions. You see them as data. You learn from them. And when you learn without judgment, change happens faster than you expect. As this pause becomes familiar, you will find yourself less pulled by small stimuli. You do not need to prove. You do not need to react immediately. You can wait, and this waiting carries great power, because it allows you to act from the most grounded place within you. A new identity does not appear through grand declarations. It appears when you choose not to react in old ways, when you choose silence instead of argument, when you choose continuation instead of quitting, when you choose small action instead of delay. Each of these choices is a brick, and the space between thought and reaction is where you place them. When you live long enough in this space, you begin to notice a deep shift. External life may still be full of pressure, but inside there is far less chaos. You are no longer swept away by every emotional wave. You keep your axis, and this axis allows you to stand steady. This space also changes how you see others. You no longer react immediately to their words or actions. You see that each person is also being driven by their own patterns, and this understanding softens the way you show up, not weaker, but deeper. When you master this pause, you enter a new level of self-command, not controlling everything, but not being controlled, and from this foundation, discipline takes on a different meaning. No longer force, but loyalty to the person you are becoming. And that loyalty is what leads you into the next phase, the phase where you build strength even when no one is watching. When you have learned how to pause between thought and reaction, a very real question begins to emerge. What will you do when no one is watching? When there is no praise, when there is no external pressure, when no one knows whether you showed up or not? It is here that true discipline is formed. Not discipline to perform, but discipline to become. Most people act well when there are eyes on them, when there is supervision, when there are expectations, when there are clear consequences if they do not act. But when all of that disappears, many people stop, not because they are lazy, but because they have not yet built a strong enough relationship with themselves. Discipline in silence is the moment you keep a promise to yourself even when no one reminds you. In that silence, there is no role to play, no image to protect, no need to prove anything. There is only you and your choice. You could skip it, and no one would know. You could delay, and no one would blame you. And precisely because of that, every time you still show up, that action carries great weight. It is not a habit. It is a declaration of who you are becoming. Discipline in silence is not loud. It does not bring excitement. It often comes with monotony, with days that show no obvious progress, with the feeling that your effort is not being recognized. But it is exactly on those days that the new identity is carved deeper. You are teaching your mind that action does not require an audience, that growth does not need to be witnessed to be real. 1 hour each day when no one is watching is where you build true self-respect. Not self-respect based on achievement, but self-respect that comes from trusting that you can rely on yourself. Each time you keep a small promise fully, that trust is strengthened. And trust in yourself is the foundation of all lasting strength. There will be days when you feel like you are working in the dark. No one knows, no one cares, no one acknowledges it. The old self inside you will ask why you should try if there is no reward. But the new self understands that the reward is not attention. It is inner shift. You do not see it immediately, but you feel it. A growing steadiness, a quiet reliability forming. Discipline in silence also removes comparison. When there is no one to compare with, you return to your own standard. You no longer ask whether you are moving faster than others. You ask whether you are moving in the right direction. And this question completely changes how you live. In silence, you begin to realize that motivation comes and goes, but discipline stays. You do not need to feel ready. You only need to be loyal to your choice. And each time you act without inspiration, you expand your capacity. You prove that you are not driven by momentary emotion. Discipline in silence also teaches patience. You do not demand immediate results. You understand that what is being built takes time. Not every change is visible right away. But you trust the process because you are living inside it every day. A different kind of confidence is born here. Not confidence from being recognized, but confidence from knowing that you will show up no matter what. You do not need someone to push you. You do not need someone to remind you. You do not need someone to believe in you first. You believe in yourself enough to act. When discipline in silence becomes a habit, you begin to notice that things which once required great effort now feel more natural, not because they are easier, but because you have become the person who does them. Your identity has shifted. You no longer ask whether you should act. You simply act. This silence also gives your results more depth, unaffected by external opinions, unshifted by comparison. You build from the inside out. And what is built from within is always more sustainable. When you live long enough with discipline in silence, one thing becomes very clear. You no longer need to talk much about your change. Others will sense it. Through how you show up, through your stability, through how you respond. But whether they notice or not no longer matters. Because you know that each day, when no one was watching, you chose to stand on the side of the person you are building. And that choice repeated long enough will carry you into the next phase. The phase where small actions begin to accumulate into a major transformation. When discipline in silence has become a familiar part of your daily life, change begins to shift into a different form. It is no longer a feeling. It becomes evidence, not loud or dramatic evidence, but small actions repeated consistently. Each action leaves a mark, and when these marks accumulate over time, they draw the outline of a different person. Many people believe change requires a breakthrough moment, a big decision, a dramatic turn. That is an appealing story, but reality works differently. Reality is built from very small things. The things you do when no one asks, the choices you make when no one forces you, the minutes you stay with what matters instead of choosing what is easy. These things do not impress immediately, but they cannot be denied. Every small action you repeat is a vote for the identity you are building. When you show up on time for something you committed to, you vote for the person who keeps promises. When you continue, even without visible results, you vote for the person who is steady. When you work with depth instead of distraction, you vote for the person who can focus. Identity is not decided by thought. It is decided by these votes. The danger of small actions is that they look insignificant. They do not create instant victory. They do not bring excitement. And because of that, many people overlook them. They wait for stronger motivation. They wait for more free time. They wait for better conditions. And while they wait, the old identity continues to be reinforced by familiar reflexes. Small actions have one powerful advantage. They do not trigger strong resistance. The mind does not panic in the face of something small. It does not feel the need to defend aggressively. And because of that, you can repeat them daily without feeling overwhelmed. This repetition creates rhythm, and rhythm creates momentum. When momentum appears, you no longer need to rely on motivation. You do not have to convince yourself every day. You simply continue. Like brushing your teeth or walking out the door, it is no longer a decision, it is part of how you live. And when action becomes a way of living, change stops being effort. It becomes nature. 1 hour each day is the container for these small actions. Not to do many things, but to do the right thing. One action aligned with your direction. One action you can repeat. One action small enough to avoid constant negotiation, yet meaningful enough to create difference over time. At first, you may see no visible change. External life looks the same. Challenges remain. Pressure still appears. But inside, a shift is taking place. You react differently. You think differently. You are less likely to quit than before. Things that once stopped you now only slow you slightly. And slowing down is not the same as stopping. Small actions also create a powerful form of honesty. You cannot deceive yourself for long. When your actions repeat daily, you see clearly what you did. You see clearly what you skipped. And this clarity allows adjustment, without judgment, without self-blame. Just returning. A very particular kind of confidence is born from repeated small actions, not confidence from results, but confidence from evidence. You know you showed up, you know you did not quit, you know you continued even when no one was watching. And this belief does not shake easily. Small actions also change how you see goals. You are no longer obsessed with the distance between where you are and where you want to be. You focus on the next step, the step you can take today. When you take that step enough times, the distance shrinks on its own. Not because the goal moved closer, but because you traveled far. One important thing to remember is that small action does not mean small thinking. Your direction remains big, your vision remains clear, but your movement is intelligent. You do not burn yourself out with explosive effort followed by collapse. You build at a pace you can sustain. Over time, you will notice these small actions have changed how you see yourself. You no longer ask whether you are disciplined enough. You no longer doubt your ability to pursue what you chose, because every day you have proven it through action, and evidence is always more convincing than words. Small actions also weaken old patterns in a very effective way. Patterns exist through repetition. When you repeat something else, the old pattern loses its source of nourishment. It does not disappear instantly, but it no longer dominates. You do not need to defeat it. You only need to stop feeding it. When you look back after some time, you may be surprised, not by a single dramatic moment, but by a series of ordinary days that created a very real difference. You speak differently, you work differently, you respond differently, and others begin to sense it, without explanation, without declaration. Small actions repeated daily are the most humble way to change a life. Quiet, undramatic, yet undeniable, because they leave marks in every part of you, from how you think to how you stand under pressure. When you have accumulated enough of this evidence, something new appears. Consistency, not forcing yourself each day, but a natural flow of behavior aligned with the person you are becoming. And from here, the journey enters a stage where consistency is no longer effort. It becomes momentum that carries you farther than you ever expected. When small actions have been repeated long enough, you begin to feel a new force emerging in your life. Momentum. Not temporary excitement, but the sense that things are moving forward naturally. You no longer have to drag yourself step by step. You are carried by a current. And this momentum changes the landscape far more deeply than any explosive burst of effort ever could. Consistency is not about doing more. It is about returning to the choice you committed to, returning to your hour for yourself, returning to the small action whether today feels favorable or not. Many people confuse intensity with progress. They pour everything into a short period and then burn out. You are different. You return. And this act of returning, repeated again and again, creates a rhythm the old self cannot keep up with. The old self survives on interruption. It grows stronger when you stop halfway, when you delay, when you start and then quit. Each time that happens, it receives a familiar message. That change is not necessary. That every effort will eventually fade. But when you stay consistent, that message no longer holds. You do not need to defeat the old self with force. You weaken it with endurance. Relentless consistency has one essential characteristic. It does not depend on emotion. Some days will feel easy. Some days will feel heavy. But consistency does not negotiate with feeling. It simply returns. When you do this long enough, you send a clear signal to the mind that this direction is not an experiment. It is a decision. Momentum is created when days connect without breaking. Not perfectly, just continuously. You do not need to perform well every day. You only need to refuse to let a difficult day become a reason to quit. When you return after losing rhythm, you reinforce the identity of someone who does not abandon themselves. And this identity is powerful. When momentum appears, many things become lighter. Tasks that once required great willpower now happen naturally, not because they are easier, but because you are accustomed to doing them. You no longer have to persuade yourself every day. You simply act. And this simplicity releases enormous energy. Energy that was once consumed by hesitation and inner conflict. Consistency also creates clarity. When you do the same intentional action each day, you quickly see what works and what does not. You adjust, without drama, without self-blame, just refinement. And this refinement sharpens your path. Something interesting happens when you live in consistency. Time seems to move to your side. You no longer feel chased. You no longer feel constantly behind. You move at a steady pace, and that steady pace creates a deep sense of control. Not control over everything, but control over how you show up. The old self will try to return during transitions. When you are tired, when you are busy, when you achieve some results, it will whisper that you can rest, that you have done enough, but you do not need to argue. You simply return. This repeated returning weakens the whisper, not because you fight it, but because you stop giving it what it needs. Interruption. Relentless consistency also builds a different kind of confidence. Not confidence based on achievement, but confidence based on reliability. You know that regardless of circumstances, you return to what matters. You know you do not abandon yourself when things are difficult. And this trust spreads into every other area of life. When you are consistent, others begin to sense your stability, not through words, but through your reactions. You are not easily shaken. You do not change direction constantly. You hold your axis, and that axis makes your presence grounded. Momentum also removes the burden from goals. You no longer see them as distant targets you must rush toward. You see them as a direction you are already walking in every day. When you have walked long enough, you realize you are very close, not because you ran fast, but because you did not stop. There will be days when you question whether this consistency is worth it, whether these quiet efforts truly make a difference. The answer is not in the current feeling. It is in the trajectory. When the trajectory has changed, results are only a matter of time, and you are living inside this new trajectory every day you return. Consistency also exposes the difference between desire and commitment. Wanting to change is easy. Committing to return every day is rare, and because it is rare, it creates a powerful advantage. You do not need to be exceptional. You only need to not quit. 1 hour each day continues to be your anchor. When everything else shifts, this hour holds you. When you lose direction, this hour brings you back to center. When you doubt, this hour gives you evidence, and this evidence accumulates into a steadiness the old self cannot break. When consistency has fully taken root, you no longer feel like you are trying to become someone. You are that person. Your behavior reflects it. Your choices reflect it. And at this moment, a larger transition is waiting ahead. The step where you no longer only maintain, you begin to stand up with full responsibility for your life. When consistency has become ingrained and momentum has formed, a very deep shift takes place within you. You begin to see your life through a different lens, no longer as a series of events happening to you that you simply react to, but as a process you are actively creating. And this turning point has a very clear name: responsibility. Not heavy responsibility, but liberating responsibility. In the past, there were things you explained through circumstances, timing, other people, or the past. Those explanations may have brought temporary relief, but they also kept you in the same place. When you step into total responsibility, you stop searching for external reasons to explain what is happening. You begin asking a different question: what will I do with this? And that question changes everything. Total responsibility is not self-blame. It is not returning to the past to judge yourself. It is standing fully in the present and acknowledging that how you think, how you respond, and how you act is shaping your life, no one else. When you see this clearly, helplessness disappears. Because if you are creating your present, you can also create your future. The difference between a reactor and a creator lies here. The reactor waits for conditions to change. The creator changes how they show up. The reactor asks why this is happening to them. The creator asks what they will build with what is happening. When you step into the role of creator, you are no longer swept away by turbulence. You learn how to stand above it. Total responsibility demands deep honesty. You no longer hide the habits that are pulling you down. You no longer defend old reflexes with reasonable-sounding excuses. You look directly, without judgment, without drama, only truth. And that truth becomes data, not a verdict. At first, this can feel heavy, because when you take responsibility, there is no one left to blame. But very quickly, you discover the power hidden inside it. When there is no blame, there is no bondage. When there is no bondage, there is space to act. And action taken in this space is different. It does not come from fear. It comes from agency. Total responsibility also changes how you see difficulty. Difficulty is no longer something that blocks you. It becomes the place where you train your new identity. Each challenge is a small test, not to see how strong you are, but to see whether you can hold your direction. And each time you hold your direction, you reinforce the belief that you are the one leading. 1 hour each day now carries a different meaning. It is no longer just training time. It is an act of responsibility. Responsibility for your focus. Responsibility for your clarity. Responsibility for the person you are becoming. When you return to that hour, you no longer ask whether you should. You know this is your work. Total responsibility also clarifies your boundaries. You no longer say yes to everything, not because you are selfish, but because you understand that every yes to what does not matter is a no to what matters most. You take responsibility for your energy, and so you choose carefully. This selectivity makes your life simpler but deeper. When you live with total responsibility, you no longer fall into the role of victim. You do not deny difficulty. You simply refuse to let it define you. You see that you always retain a portion of choice, even if small, even in imperfect situations. And that portion of choice is enough to keep building. A deep steadiness emerges from here. You are no longer disoriented when things do not go according to plan. You adjust, you learn, you continue. You do not need to maintain a perfect image. You only need to maintain direction. And that direction has been reinforced through countless days of returning. Total responsibility also transforms how you view success. Success is no longer something you achieve to prove your worth. It becomes the natural consequence of how you live. When you take responsibility each day for small actions, large outcomes become inevitable, not because of luck, but because the trajectory has been set. In the role of creator, you do not wait for motivation. You do not wait for certainty. You act from commitment. And this commitment does not come from external pressure. It comes from the deep understanding that this is your life. No one else lives it for you. No one else carries it for you. And no one else builds it for you. When you stand fully in responsibility, you also become lighter. Because you no longer carry resentment toward the world. You no longer feel unfairly treated. You are no longer trapped in the old story. You are writing a new one through daily choice. Others may not notice this change immediately, but you do. You feel the difference in how you stand under pressure, in how you respond to failure, in how you continue when things are not easy. And this difference is a clear sign that you have moved into another level of the journey. Total responsibility does not make life easier. It makes life real. And within that reality, you find sustainable strength. Strength that does not depend on conditions, praise, or convenience. When you have lived long enough in the role of creator, you begin to sense something very distinct. The old self can no longer keep up with you. Not because you are moving faster, but because you are standing in a different place. The place of someone who takes responsibility for themselves. And from this place, the final step of the journey begins to open. The step where you rise fully into your new identity and leave the old self behind. Comes a very clear moment when you realize you are no longer trying to become someone. You are living as that person. Not because everything is perfect, but because the way you show up has changed. You no longer react on autopilot. You no longer let the day define your identity. You have built an inner axis strong enough to stand upright amid any fluctuation. And it is here that the rise happens. Quietly, without display. but irreversible. The old self does not disappear through a dramatic decision. It fades because it is no longer being fed. Old habits lose their power when you stop repeating them. Old stories lose their weight when you stop living by them. You do not need to defeat the old self. You only need to continue living as the new self. And that continuation is enough to create distance. When you rise with intention, you no longer need to prove anything. You do not need others to understand immediately. You do not need instant recognition. Because inner stability has replaced external need. You know where you are going. You know why you are here. And you know that each day you are living in alignment with that truth. This rise is not about climbing above others. It is about standing in the right place for yourself. A place where you no longer fragment your attention, no longer sell your energy cheaply, no longer compromise with what weakens you. You live selectively, you act with intention, and you continue even when there is no applause. From the outside, your life may not look dramatically different, but inside, everything has changed. You no longer fear stillness. You no longer avoid discomfort. You no longer panic in the face of challenge. You have built a very rare capacity, the capacity to stay with your goal, to stay with your direction, to stay with yourself. The old self lived by reflex. The new self lives by choice. And this difference alters the entire trajectory of a life, not in a single day, but day by day. Every hour you return to what matters. Every small action you repeat, every time you take responsibility instead of assigning blame, all of it becomes the signature of your new identity. When you look back, you may realize that change did not come from trying harder. It came from becoming clearer. Clear about what you are building. Clear about what you refuse. Clear about who you are becoming. And that clarity brings a deep sensation, the feeling of living in truth. Rising with intention does not remove difficulty from life. It removes difficulty's control over you. You step into challenges with steadiness. You face pressure with focus. You continue with consistency. And each time you do, you reaffirm your new identity. You are no longer someone waiting for the perfect moment. You are someone who creates rhythm. You are no longer someone asking whether you are enough. You are someone who proves it through daily action. You are no longer pulled by the old self because you have moved beyond it, not by speed, but by steadfastness. 1 hour each day brought you here, not as a formula, but as a doorway out of repetition and into a life lived with intention. And as you continue to protect that doorway, the old self will no longer be able to find you. Not because you are hiding, but because you have become someone else. This is not the end. It is the beginning of a new way of living, a way of living where you are no longer lost, no longer fragmented, no longer reactive. You stand steady, you continue, and you rise, not once, but every day. You have just completed a very different journey, not a journey outward, but a journey of returning and rebuilding yourself. You have seen why people do not change, not because they lack potential, but because they lack space. You have understood the power of 1 hour each day when it is used to step out of automatic mode, cut through distraction, meet yourself again in stillness, take command of the morning, train deep focus, stay with discomfort, break old patterns, build discipline in silence, accumulate small actions, maintain consistency, and ultimately stand up with total responsibility for your own life. All of this is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming intentional, about living in alignment with the new identity you are building day by day. Thank you for staying until the end of this video. Your presence here shows that you are serious about yourself and about the life you want to create. If this content gave you a new perspective, a moment of awakening, or simply caused you to pause and reflect more deeply, please like the video to support the channel. Share it with anyone you know who feels stuck and needs a clearer direction. And do not forget to subscribe to continue walking alongside inspiring stories, personal growth, and the journey of mastering the inner world in future videos. Thank you for listening. and I will see you in the next journey.